Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of The Ways We Move. I believe this is episode 16. Yes, 16 episodes since the beginning of the year 2025. We're doing a good job here. I'm very excited. And as always, first, I want to welcome you. I'm your host, Nicholas Zart, and I want to welcome you to yet another exciting episode because, again, this is a very special guest that we have on today's podcast. And I know I say that a lot, but some guests are very unique and very important to me. Not that the others aren't, that's not what I mean to say, but because I've known this person for many years. We talk very often, and I also consider him to be a friend over the years. This is somebody who is very well known in the industry, somebody who I never hesitate to call and go, "Hey, Rex, does this make sense or not?" Now, you've heard the name Rex. Now, put next to it Mr. Infrastructure, and welcome Rex Alexander from 5 Alpha, who is also known as Mr. Infrastructure. So whenever Rex and I talk, or Clint Harper and I talk, it's never a 10-minute talk. It's never a 20-minute talk. It's usually an hour and a half. And of course, this podcast ballooned to well over an hour. So what I did is I decided to cut it back down into 2 half-hour spots so that you can follow and don't have to pause and forget where you were or anything like that. I want to talk a little bit about what we talked about because there's a lot of background information behind what we talk about. And in a nutshell, the advanced air mobility industry is divided into the very public-facing message of yay, and then what really happens behind, which is the infrastructures, the logistics, the investment part of it. All of that is very complicated to tackle. And Rex and Clint are two of the people I value the most in the industry to really talk about these things because they are very well experienced in that. They are the leading people who go and talk to the FAA, who go and talk to the DOT, at least here in the US, but who are also involved internationally. They go to Saudi Arabia, they go to Europe, and get involved with the local regulatory bodies over there. So very quickly, and Rex will go into more details about what he does, but what we talk about here is the Vertical Flight Society is a big part of what we have done. This is actually where I met Rex Alexander when I was working at the Vertical Flight Society as the business the business director of the society, and we're going to talk about how the FAA is now looking into a more harmonized infrastructure policy around hybrid hydrogen, eSTOLs and eCTOLs. Now, this is very big. Because it's not just the FAA, it's also EASA and the rest of regulatory bodies. What are they doing? How are they looking at it and all? Harmonizing international various parts of, FAA part 1, part everything, 135 and everything, and tackling the international helicopter conundrum. For the most part, we've never taken a helicopter to go from, let's say, here in the US to Europe, right? But now that we have these eVTOLs, eSTOLs, eCTOLs, well, we have to start looking into that. The complexities of doing business in the United States, and this is especially for you guys in Europe and elsewhere, is we have the federal level, we have the state level, and then we have municipalities. And then we also have FAA when it comes to everything that's public flying and DOT when it comes to private flying. So we've got a lot of different granular layers we have to go through. The big news, at least for us, is for the last few years, we've been pushing the idea of multiports, working with regional airports to include current aviation airplanes, but also helicopters, and introducing first eSTOLs and eCTOLs, since they're going to be certified first, and then eVTOL, so making it a more holistic approach than just simply saying eVTOLs and vertiports, which is a very hard business case to make. And I think that's about it. And then we'll just go into a difference between what does ICAO do and what does the FAA do. And I think for some people, there's still a little bit of confusion. So welcome to part 1. We'll go after that into part 2. And I can't wait again to hear your comments, your thoughts. Please like, share, subscribe. And then without further ado, let's have Rex introduce himself. So Rex, tell us a little bit about you. Who is Rex?
Rex is a worn out blue collared helicopter driver that has been around for a little while. I've been flying since I was about 14. Started in fixed wing, then went to the college and got my degree in aeronautics. Was working at McDonnell Douglas for a little while there in St. Louis, and
Yeah.
wound up going to the Army. The Army said, "Hey, we'll teach you how to fly." I said, "Okay, send me." So I spent 6 years on active duty and 5 in the Guard. Spent some time in the offshore oil and gas world, and then better part of 20 years in the air medical industry, flying helicopters throughout the country. Got involved in this space that is infrastructure about 30 years ago, and managed to turn it into a career and now a business. So yeah, life is good.
So many things you said there that deserve a lot more questions. And for those who don't know, Rex is probably the only person I know of who goes by the handle of Mr. Infrastructure and actually can back it up, which is rare, right?
No, I got
Um,
that. Somebody called me that like 15 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to own that one. Yeah, I like that. So I started using it and stuck. So it was all good.
and it's true to this day. If I have a doubt or a question, who do I call? I call Rex. And Rex, does that make any sense? Yes, no, yes, no, perfect. What do you have today? Tell us a little bit more about your company. What do you do?
So 5 Alpha, I'd started this company right after I left Uber Elevate. I was their head of infrastructure for about a year. Prior to that, was working in partnership with a good friend of mine, Ray Sims. We merged our two companies and formed Heli Experts International. I was in that for 5 years. Uber became a client. We worked with them for a year, and then I went internal to Uber, left, and decided to start this company, 5 Alpha. That was 2018, and shortly thereafter, signed Vertical Flight Society as a client. I'm their
Right.
vertical flight infrastructure advisor, and all things infrastructure for vertical flight for them around the world. So 5 Alpha specializes in, as I said, infrastructure. Traditional heliports have been probably the majority of what we've done, but now I'd say that's about 50% of our business. The other 50% then falls into electric vertical takeoff and landing and vertiports and developing standards and doing the research and development with the FAA and NASA and ICAO and all the other groups out there in this space. So it's been exciting. It's been busy. I can't complain. It keeps me hopping.
Yeah, because you do travel a lot, so you have a lot of firsthand experience and contact with all the regulatory bodies out there. One question I always wanted to ask you, I didn't know that you started with fixed wings. What was the transition to rotary wings? How did that happen?
It was one of those. I'd put an application in with the Navy and I put an application in with the Army, and the Army called back first. So I said, okay, I'll go there. Was in basic training that the Navy called. Hey, we're happy to tell you that we've accepted your application. I said, well, it's a
Oh,
little too late, but it is what it is. I ended up in rotary wing and never looked back. And I managed to carve out a nice niche in this market for the last, God, 40 years.
yeah, and it's true. You're one of the rare people who actually have you can fly both, so you understand both. And it always reminds me of my funny take when I was on the simulator with Beta, and I took off, just of course horizontally, vertically like this, flying it just like an airplane and trying to land it just like an airplane, and you realize no, it's not. You can't land on a vertipad like that. Crawl, 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 down, boom. So yeah, so you really do need that. So tell us a little bit about what's your take on the industry right now? Because you and I have talked about the industry for many years now. We've seen it morph from a very, albeit naive, we're going to fly from rooftops to rooftops, and voila, all of a sudden there's a parking spot, and all of a sudden there's an airport too. Now we have a much more mature, robust infrastructure idea. What's your take on the industry over the last few years, and where are we going? I know it's a loaded question, isn't it?
No, that's a lot to unpack there, but I'd say right now that we're starting to see federal, state, and local municipalities all get on board and start moving in hopefully the same direction. When I first really dove into this for Vertical Flight Society, it started with myself and Mike Hirschberg on Capitol Hill and in FAA headquarters there in Washington, D.C. back in 2019, and trying to spearhead the discussion on what infrastructure was. And we saw a lot of advanced air mobility eVTOL manufacturers working feverishly on their aircraft, but no one seemed to be thinking about where they're going to land and take off. So that was our goal as Vertical Flight Society, was to help, foster that. And we've done a lot since that first meeting. We've had probably 8 workshops just on vertical flight infrastructure under Vertical Flight Society's umbrella. And
Yep.
I would say, having been on Capitol Hill just a couple months ago, one of the discussions we had with a lot of congressional staffers was that infrastructure is based really on standards and policy. And while the aircraft are moving at a feverish speed in the technology side, the infrastructure policy is lagging slowly behind. So in that, we're trying to convince all the different players to get on board to, provide and write and develop common sense, harmonized policy that will support this next generation of electric vertical takeoff and landing, as well as the hybrid, the hydrogen, and not only eVTOL, but also eSTOL and eCTOL.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I think a lot of people might not fully understand when we think of advanced air mobility. Yeah, all eyes are on the shiny, pretty eVTOLs flying in the airspace. But like you said, they need to take off somewhere. They need to land somewhere. They need to be handled, and they're not the only players in town. eSTOL, short takeoff and landing. We had Mark Osman not too long ago on the show where we talked about the efficiency of a 9-seater that uses less electricity, IFR, de-icing. There's a lot more operations involved in there, and of course, at some point we'll see Aviation, if they manage to get their Alice up and running. We'll also see bigger, and then Wright Electric, which has been, these guys have been working on some pretty interesting things too. So it really is a whole array of different things that are happening under AAM. You mentioned also harmony when it comes to regulatory body. And I guess it could be fair to say that right now all eyes are on the FAA and EASA. How do you see those two moving? Because at one point they were moving in different directions. They seem to have started to get back onto a similar path. How do you see that going right now?
Well, every country has their own civil aviation authority. So we were just in Saudi Arabia with Nexa Capital Partners and Michael Diamond's group, working collaboratively with multiple different organizations and OEMs from the U.S. The group that we worked with was the U.S. Saudi Business Council, fantastic group. Charles Habib was fantastic. But I think in that space that was one of the questions we were asked in Saudi, is like harmonization and how do we get commonality. And I think one of the challenges that we look at is, we look at Part 121 versus 135 and helicopters versus fixed wing. And we've never really had a industry rotorcraft helicopter platform that was international. So if I was taking off from the U.S. going somewhere else, normally it wasn't in a helicopter. So there was not an international plan there. Whereas in the fixed wing world, that was a big deal. And you had to meet certain criteria and certain safety criteria. So I think in that space, we're looking at harmonization as key for the business model that the OEMs are looking to accomplish. And if we can keep that business model and those standards similar across all platforms in all the different countries, it's going to make it a lot easier. It's going to make it a lot more efficient, as well as a lot less expensive. Getting everybody on the same sheet of music is, of course, a challenge in any discussion you have. I see ICAO starting to take a little bit more of a leadership role in trying to harmonize what's going on between the different civil aviation authorities like EASA and the FAA, as well as, Australia is pushing really hard, China's pushing really hard, Singapore's pushing really hard, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. So I think there's a lot to be had in global discussions on what this looks like. In the United States, I think one of the challenges we have, it's also one of the things that sets us apart sometimes in what we can accomplish, sometimes not what we can accomplish, is we don't have just the federal level. We also have the state
Yes.
level, and we also have the municipality level. And so you got three layers in the US, whereas if I go to Canada and I'm working up there, I'm working primarily with Transport Canada. City and state don't really take a huge role in heliport development, yet to be seen in vertiport development.
Yep.
I think one challenge in the US that we're going to have to figure out is land use. And our good friend Clint Harper and I have had many discussions on this, as well as Don Zoldi over at P3 and Clint over at Harper 4D. Land use, that's a different language. The Federal Aviation Administration speaks aviation. They don't speak land use that well. Then you go to the Planning and Zoning Commission in a city. Well, they don't speak aviation that well. So it's getting the right people sitting at the table to interpret what each other's trying to say and come up with a policy. And in this case, for local, is ordinances. So having an ordinance on the books that speaks to it properly, uses the correct terminology, terms that are actually defined by regulations, not something someone made up at 2:00 in the morning in a closed door session. And then policy that was written collaboratively, not by someone that's trying to push their own agenda. And I hate to say it, hoodwink some legislative body and writing something up that's actually going to shoot them in the foot later on. So I think there's a lot to be done in that space, but I'm seeing the glue start to set, and I'm hoping that the pieces will settle into place from harmonization across globalization. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of effort, but it's starting to head that direction.
Rightfully so. I think in many ways AAM is an enabler, and like you said, it's probably the glue that will link together a lot of different services. And I think another thing too is when we go to Europe or other parts of the world, is explaining to people something that they're just never used to. Indeed, the federal level, the state level, municipalities, and also the difference between DOT and the FAA, who acts what, where, when, and how. So we have, 4D kaleidoscope kind of landscape to deal with, whereas in Europe it's pretty much top to bottom, done deal, and there's very little that the city needs to do. But yeah, that's that. And it's interesting that you should say that about the helicopter industry, because you're right. We never took helicopter flights that were international, or very rarely so. So those are procedures that we need to start to take into consideration. One thing that we started to talk about is, and we briefly hinted at it, is this insistence on the eVTOL side of things only, and vertiports only, and a lot of resistance around the fact that how do we make financial sense of vertiports, the business case for vertiports. So one thing that you and I have been talking for a few years now is to sort of broaden the scope of advanced air mobility to indeed include eSTOLs, eCTOLs, aviation, current aviation, conventional aviation, helicopters, and maybe talk more in terms of multiports. Have you seen any move towards that? Because this is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. Have you seen any move towards that happening yet?
To some degree, I think when I first started in this business with Uber, it was all about building vertiports. Then I think it was a wake-up call that who's paying for this and how do we get started? And I look at it from the aspect of you want to attract investors. First, you have to prove that your theory and your market idea actually work and will give them a return on their investment. Well, to do that, you don't want to spend a fortune hoping that you'll recoup that. So improving your theory, improving your business model, it's crawl, walk, run. So where can you start? Airports, small regional airports or city-based airports that may not have a whole lot of traffic today, probably are very hungry for a business model that will help them grow and also give them longevity. Also, when we look at the footprint necessary for the type of operation we're looking for, airports give you a lot to play with. Airports have a better airspace in most cases than heliports do. Airports generally have better access to electricity if you're looking to put in a charging
True.
system. The average heliport doesn't have electricity. If it does, it doesn't have nearly the capacity that you're looking for a charger. So moving electricity is a big deal, and airports are much higher on the list than heliports are when it comes to talking to utility companies to move electricity to. So it's a situation where we look at seeing this type of operation occur at airports, and then we may see that then migrate to some heliports. It's all going to be based on geometry, what the heliport is capable of supporting from a size standpoint. The average heliport in the United States is based on minimum 40 by 40 for hospitals. Well, if you have a 50 by 50 overall length, or what we refer to as the controlling dimension, or D, that we use now for Engineering Brief 105, well, that's not big enough. And the FATO is a little bit bigger, and the safety is a little bit bigger. And the average heliport that's out there right now is incapable of supporting that. When we look at putting in the next generation of aviation, is it not just electric? We talked a little bit about hybrid. So maybe hybrid's one that we look at. We talked about hydrogen. We also had mentioned stall ports. So stall ports are one thing that, ironically, we had an advisory circular back in 1970 that the FAA had published on stall ports. It's since been terminated because it just wasn't being utilized. ICAO has criteria for stall ports in one of their dockets as well. So looking at what a stall port is going to be interesting, and what the footprint from a geometric perspective. I've seen a lot of eSTOL manufacturers talking about the footprint they need for landing and taking off. And some have been able to land and take off within 150 feet, some within 300 feet. Then we have to figure out what the overrun requirements are of the physical footprint. But then we also have to figure out what's the airspace look like. If it's going to be amalgamation of what heliport airspace is, which uses that 8-to-1 approach surface, which is a 7.125 degree angle. But in looking at the folks at Electra Aero, they were taking off well above that 8-to-1. Their approach and departure was much steeper. So when you look at what that then looks like, we have to figure that out. Now, the good news is the FAA, in a meeting that Mike Hirschberg and I attended in Washington, D.C. about a month and a half ago with FAA airports, we were talking about what their timeline looked like and what they're trying to accomplish for heliports, vertiports, and now they've introduced stall port criteria. So they mentioned it in there.
That's good news.
That they are, trying to set up their calendar for testing right now. So they're trying to get their calendar figured out for 2025 by the end of April. And after that, they're looking to get all their flight testing done by the end of 2025. And from the day we had the meeting about a month and a half ago, they were looking at publishing a standard in 18 to 24 months from that date. Now, that standard is going to take the Heliport Design Advisory Circular 1505390-2 Delta, merge that with the Vertiport Engineering Brief 105 Alpha, and also incorporate a whole new standard for stall ports. And those first two documents will sunset, and then a new document and a new advisory circular then will be published. So there's a lot to be done in the next 24 months, to say the least. And I'll be interested to see how things shake out with stall ports. I know I've had some really good conversations with a couple of the eSTOL people in that space. So I expect probably in May, we'll see a huge push to start putting things on paper and getting people involved and figuring out what stall ports are. And it gets down to a point where if you have a a heliport, you have a vertiport, you have a drone port, you have a stall port, and they're all at the same location. What do you call it?
Exactly.
I use the term multiport. Some people hate that term,
I
but
like it.
I know
Why?
it's one of those situations, and a lot of that stemmed from discussions I had with hospitals. Talked to a hospital CEO, and they're like, I don't have the room for two different landing areas. I don't have the space, I don't have the real estate, and I don't have the money. So I need a port that'll accept all that. So I'm going to run drones, I'm going to run helicopters, and I'm going to run eVTOL. I need one landing zone that accomplishes all those at the same location. So that, I think that's where the multi-port idea kind of came up with. Now,
Yeah.
will hospitals use stall aircraft? Yet to be determined. It might prove to be a transportation method we look at for large hospitals. I don't see it on a rooftop per se, but it might be
No,
something that we could put on the ground at large
no.
campuses. Don't know yet. Yet to be seen.
Another thing too, and this might appeal to your ambulance career before, but if you have someone who is in a critical shape, landing on an eSTOL might be a little rough because these guys are coming in at a serious angle like this. I don't know what the landing feels like on these things, but I always wondered people who are seasick, get seasick very quickly
Mm.
or airsick, they might feel that. So maybe another conversation I was having with an Oregon surgeon was that they're starting to fly organs with drones because there are less vibration than in a helicopter, less, blam, 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 things like that. So that's another topic that would be good to talk about. But yeah, give us 500 feet and you can have a multi-port. That's absolutely is not a problem.
Yeah, you bring up a good point on the vibration piece and the impact on patient morbidity and mortality. There's been several studies in the medical world that show vibration and its type of vibration and what the impact. It's a high frequency vibration, low vibration. The most susceptible people from a patient standpoint, cardiac patients, trauma patients that have a lot of
Yep.
lower extremity fractures, and then neonatal patients are highly susceptible to vibration. So, and then we get into the other piece of the puzzle that you alluded to was the trajectory that you're going to fly into and out of a location. What's the G loading?
Yeah.
So we look at what the impact on the physiology of a person is from the G loading. So you want to make it a smooth ride. You want the acceleration and deceleration to be almost non-perceptible by the individual that's on board. So you don't want the roller coaster ride. You want the limousine ride.
Yeah, I mean, personally, yeah, give me 3 Gs. Yeah, that'll be fun. But I don't see somebody with a head trauma wanting that at all by any stretch
No,
of the imagination.
no, there's a lot of
Um,
bad things that occur when you put a load like that on an individual with a serious injury or who's experiencing
yeah.
major medical challenges.
That's why I always thought of, one of my favorite aircraft out there is sadly is one that a lot of people think it's not pretty and not sexy, which I don't understand why they would say that. But you know where I'm leading to that, right? It's the jaunt mobility, the journey,
Hmm?
because that idea of a mass tilting forward, so the attitude is always straight taking off or landing. It's kind of like a best of both worlds that aircraft, and that would actually answer that question pretty well. Well, anyway, yeah, we'll see where Jaunt is going because I always did like this that aircraft a lot. At
No,
least it's elegant solution.
it takes advantage of some technology that's been around for a long time and actually applying it with or I won't say technologies, the idea and the theory now has the technology to make it something that's suitable and useful.
Yeah.
And then with John, I know I've talked to them. They're looking at certifying under Part 29, which allows for the auto rotative capability, whereas some of the eVTOL manufacturers are having a
Yes.
challenge with the FAA since they neither have the ability to auto rotate nor glide. So when you look at the stall aircraft like Electro Aero, they're more of an airplane. They're not certifying under the eVTOL standard. They're certifying under Part 23.
That's you bring up another point too that I think many of us talk but don't always talk publicly about. It's this whole right now, if you read the news, I mean, every eVTOL maker out there is saying they're going to get certified by 2025 at the latest 2026. But the other question that we don't really always hear about is, when is commercial certification going to happen? And then the other thing, which is even more interesting, is no matter how I look at it, it's easier for the FAA, EASA, every other regulatory bodies in the world to certify a fuselage, wings, and empennage than it is for a multi-rotor
Mhm.
system, right? So what's your take on that? I always cringe when I read some of these press releases.
I'm a student of history, and it's interesting. I was looking at what does history say of aviation. So, in looking at the helicopter as a new form of aviation,
Yes.
I was looking through all the different newspapers, through different search engines that used the term helicopter. I could go back to 1890
Yep.
when the term first showed up. It was in
Yep.
1911 that I saw that they were attempting, and they were talking about serviceability, passenger movement. I mean, it's almost like we took the article for eVTOL
Yep.
that's written in the last couple of years
Yep.
and just plugged in helicopter, but it was written in 1911. So you look at how long did it take the helicopter to catch on and actually be something, get certified and prove its worth and prove its safety. So yeah, I know there's a lot of people pushing really, really hard, which is great. And I give them,
Yep. Agreed.
kudos for the work they're doing and wish them the best.
Absolutely.
But
Yep.
then I kind of look at history and say, probably not going to be as fast as you'd hoped. Though
Yeah.
technology has improved that path significantly for testing. It
Yes.
still hasn't made it as short as we'd hoped. It'll happen. It's just I don't know that it'll happen by the end of this year. Then, even once we get certified aircraft, we still got to manufacture the aircraft. Then there's the food chain that we have to deal with from a logistical standpoint. There's the people we have to train, the pilots and mechanics. Then there's the
Yep.
spare parts we have to develop and produce. There's the maintenance. There's the training. We still have to come up with a curriculum for the airframe and power plant
Yep.
technicians to are going to maintain these aircraft. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's going to take time. We're making
Yeah.
huge strides going forward, but at the same time, it's not, you just don't snap your fingers and boom, there it is.
It's true. And that's a really good point you're making here, is we're moving faster than we've ever had, I think, in the aviation industry. Maybe, in the 1910 to 1930s, we moved really quickly, lots of different systems, lots of different configurations. But when it comes to how well developed aviation is these days, regulated and everything, we're moving pretty fast inside of all of this. And it's going to be interesting. And I love the fact that electricity, or the electric motor, is the enabler for some sort of crazy wild engineering creativity all of a sudden, which is much needed. I'm very excited about that. But yeah, we'll have to see where all of that goes. But I'm still betting on eSTOLs and eCTOLs getting certified first, at least operationally, commercially, and then we'll see where everything else will come into play. One thing that you mentioned, and I wanted to go back to it, is I think people might not understand the difference between what the FAA does and what ICAO does. Can you give us a little bit of a briefing on that? Because sometimes people refer to one and then they refer to the other. So can you give us a very big bird's eye view so that it's very clear
Okay.
in people's mind?
So ICAO came out of a convention back in the 40s where all the civil aviation authorities in the different countries signed on. Follows in line very closely with the makeup of like the United Nations, and
Mm-hmm.
was primarily and is primarily a group of individuals from each nation get together and determine what standards they would like to have as a global entity. Now, the FAA is a member of ICAO and
Right.
participates regularly and works closely with ICAO. You as a nation don't have to follow ICAO criteria if you provide equivalent criteria that's got the equivalent in safety and does the same thing. So in some cases, United States has drafted its own standard criteria for different things. Other nations have done the same thing.
Yep.
Some nations follow ICAO to a T and others don't.
Yep.
ICAO is a standards body that
Yep.
develop standards specifically around aviation. Now, the FAA does develop standards, but they're also a body that is an enforcement body. So all civil aviation
Uh,
authorities have an enforcement arm, whereas ICAO is not an enforcing group. So that's probably the biggest difference between the two is ICAO doesn't enforce anything. They're a standards body.